Hey everybody, it's maple syrup time. It is 9 o'clock p.m. Eastern Standard Time, where I am in London, Ontario, Canada. And Kat, where are you right now?
I am in Portland, Oregon again today, and it is a warm 6 p.m.
Oh, is it warm there?
It's warm, yeah.
Like unseasonably warm?
I mean, it's basically summer, so I guess not unseasonably, but unportlandly warm.
Oh, okay, I get it. Okay. And today, everybody, we're here with a very special guest. We're here with the one, the only Jordan Weisman. How are you doing, Jordan?
I am well. Thank you for having me. And I think our warm will trump your warm. We're outside Phoenix, so it's about 100 degrees.
Oh my gosh, yes, that
Yeah,
is
that's
that is
real warm.
very warm.
That's like the actual warm. No, I'm like, oh, I think it's getting close to 70.
So we invited Jordan here today to talk about a very specific project that he's working on. But for those of you who don't know, Jordan is sort of like um, critical, critical to the establishment of tabletop gaming in the Americas in the 80s, maybe even the late 70s. Jordan, what would you think?
I mean, I didn't start publishing in. We started FASA in 1980,
Okay,
so
so literally the 80s.
yeah.
Right. Okay. So, Jordan, can you tell us a little bit about yourself? Tell us who you are and why you're here.
And how you got into gaming.
Yeah, I always want to do the line from The Jerk, where where he's like, I was born on a little piece of land. But no, I was born in Chicago, and which gets a lot of snow, so there's a lot of gamers. Um,
That makes sense.
I was so I basically we can do the whole kind of why'd you get into gaming later if it's of interest, but started a company called FASA in 1980, publishing originally Star Trek Starship deck plans for a game called Traveler, which was a very popular tabletop RPG at the time. And then Mark Miller saw what we were doing and said, "Hey, you should do that officially under license because they're really cool." So we got a license from Mark, and then we did deck plans, and then adventures, and then more and more products. Actually, an early software product I wrote, which mapped out galaxies and everything for you in Traveler. And then from there, we branched off into doing some of our own games, a couple of original ones, Grab Ball and Behind Enemy Lines, which was a kind of World War II RPG. And then we did the Star Trek role playing game, got the license from Paramount, and that really started to expand the company. We did just years of great Star Trek product, inventing all sorts of really important things that became parts of the lore and franchise still is. I mean, you still see references to our stuff in the TV shows and things.
Oh, that must be weird.
Oh yeah, there's lots of good Star Trek
How
stories.
cool.
And then into doing our own products, most notably BattleTech and then Shadowrun. Um, and so yeah, that's how we got into it. Is all through tabletop. But yeah, my inspiration goes way back to being not able to read. So I was a severely dyslexic kid before
Oh,
I really knew what dyslexia was. So I didn't read, and I'm like a lot of dyslexic kids, cheated my way through school. Um, and then I was a junior counselor at a summer camp in Wisconsin the year D&D came out, and one of the other counselors brought a copy in, and like mind blown. This I had to play this game. I had to create my own stories, run my own games. Problem is, I needed to read the rules, and I needed to read a couple of small books that a guy named Tolkien wrote to be able to understand the world that it was set in. So, yeah, The Hobbit and Lord of the Rings became my C, Dick, and Jane run to learn how to read. So, yeah, that's how I originally got into gaming.
my goodness, that's an interesting book to be learning to read in. I
Oh,
mean,
yeah, yeah.
I
And I'll
I
tell you, some of those songs. I,
I grew up on Tolkien. Like, my dad used to read those books to us when we were little kids, and as I was growing up, I read them every year. And I have ADHD, which is useful. It means that I can forget a lot of things, so I can reread books. I can't reread ones that have got like a mystery or something like that, but I can happily reread things like that until the movies came out. Peter Jackson, you specifically, Peter, because he did that, it just completely changed the way that I could view those worlds, because I viewed them in my head. And now that they had been taken out of my head and put on a screen, I think I've read them maybe once since.
Interesting.
Well, yeah. So anyway, while we're in the Wayback Machine, so I went back to Chicago and talked to my high school friends and said, "All right, we got to play this game. This is amazing. We need to go buy copies of it." At the time, there was only one place to buy copies of it, and that was at Gary Gygax's house in Lake Geneva. So we drove up from Chicago to Lake Geneva, and we went to the first floor of Gary's house.
This is not Lake Geneva in Switzerland, then.
No, this is Lake Geneva in Wisconsin.
Lake Geneva,
Okay.
It's not that far from Chicago.
I'm not from here.
Yeah, it's a couple hours from Chicago.
Okay.
3 hours from Chicago. Anyway, yeah. So the ground floor had been converted to a store, and we came in to buy copies, and the guy manning the store was Dave Arneson, because at the time it was really just Gary and Dave running the place. And like we bought like 7 copies, which was a big sale. So Dave said, "Hey, I'll run you guys on an adventure if you want." And we're like, "Yeah, that'd be awesome." So we went into Gary's kitchen, and they had set up the table there in a really unique way. I know this is way deep dive story, but anyway,
No, this is
okay.
so cool.
This is
This is
awesome.
really interesting.
they had set up where it was a breakfast nook, and so you had the table, and so Dave sat on one side of the table, we all sat around the other side, but between us was a floor to ceiling, like perforated piece of wood, like you would see like bank tellers, like you would have like a.
Oh, right. Yeah.
So we couldn't see Dave, right? He was just this, he had an incredible voice, and he had this incredibly rich, deep voice, and he was a great storyteller. So we just heard this voice, right? And not seeing him also really added to the kind of whole immersion, of the whole thing. And
Like, this is
then
the voice of God.
Yeah.
it was, and then there would be like like a bank teller. There's like a hole cut, and every once in
Right.
a while, his hand would come out and say, "Roll these."
Oh,
It was awesome. It was a fantastic experience, and so
that
I had been
sounds
playing
so
it at
cool.
summer camp. My friends had never played the game, so this was their first experience with D&D, and yeah, they were hooked. So,
Are they still hooked to this day?
oh yeah, I mean, all of us became hardcore geeks. And later in life, I worked with Gary. I published one of Gary's games, and spent a bunch of time with him, and then became really good friends with Dave Arneson, and we worked together a bunch. And he was a dear man. Really miss him.
Mm-hmm. Because it's D&D's like officially 50th year this year, I guess, which is also phenomenal, right? So there's a great big piece of American tabletop history in Dungeons and Dragons in itself, and what it kind of did to open up tabletop for so many people around the world, but specifically in the Midwest and in America, and then into Canada and things like that. So that's fascinating. So that's where you got your start, and eventually you went to school and you decided to start up FASA and
Oh
started with other things.
yeah,
Was there
yeah.
stuff in between there?
So right. So that was playing. Yeah, we played a lot. We made a big game club in high school, and it was I was kind of all in on the games. I was always a terrible student, but now I was an even worse student because I was totally always working on my D&D campaign and then eventually my Traveler campaign. Anyway, so when it came to go to college, I was really not going to get in any place except for maybe the local commuter school. And we didn't have a lot of money at the time, so I couldn't buy my way into a better school. So I always loved sailing, and so I had this romantic vision of what life at sea was going to be like. So I applied to the United States Merchant Marine Academy, which is a government funded academy. It's like West Point or Annapolis or whatever. And because we're in the Midwest, there wasn't that many people applying from our state, so I got in. And then all of a sudden, as long hair hippie freak, had his head shaved, was in the Navy. And that was an interesting experience all by itself. But at the Academy, they had just finished this $50 million bridge simulator to train pilots, not pilots of airplanes, pilots of ships.
Right.
And when a big ship comes into a port, a pilot from the port will come and get on the ship and takes over the command of the ship to navigate it through the port, because they're so hard to navigate through, and it's such specific knowledge. But they didn't have a good way to train pilots, so they built this bridge simulator, which was it was all the actual hardware of a ship's bridge, and then it had giant projection screens with dozens of polygons on them.
Dozens.
Dozens of polygons on them to represent the port.
Maybe even more than 10.
It was 1978, I think. So it was dozens of polygons was impressive in those days.
I don't know. That's when I was born.
You look good for your age.
Oh, thank you.
Anyway, so I saw that and I was like, well, that's the future of entertainment. I got to go build that. And I was convinced that I could put together a number of Apple IIs. And there was no such thing as a network card, but I was like, somehow we can wire them together, serial connect the motherboards, and build our own simulator for much less money and much more immersion. And so I did what every logical person does: is dropped out of school and went and tried to go do that.
I mean, you lived in an age where that was possible, so
Yeah.
That's okay.
I mean, this all sounds completely acceptable to me so far. And you were already a computery person at that point as well.
Yeah, I was a computer nerd. Yeah,
because that wasn't that common back then, right?
No, it wasn't anywhere near as common as it is now. That's for sure. Anyway, so dropped out of school, came home, tried to, wire our Apple IIs together, which resulted in frying all our motherboards, and then went out and tried to raise money from venture capitalists and other investors to build this idea of creating these entertainment centers where you would come and be the crew of a starship, going through the universe and have your missions and all the rest of it. Very Star Trek, kind of inspired, and Traveler kind of inspired. And surprisingly, no one wanted to invest in a college dropout saying things that they had no idea what they meant. Like, what's a computer game? Why would people pay to play one? What's a bridge simulator? I mean, none of these things existed in common parlance. So that didn't work. So that's what then drove I was like, well, then I'll just start a tabletop game company, get rich overnight, and then use the money from that to do the simulations.
Yeah, because that's how it works.
That's how that works.
It works,
yeah,
right? I mean, it's just like, boom, should be simple. And overnight, it wasn't. It was about, but luckily, FASA was a pretty quick track upwards, and grew a lot. Grew to be the second largest in that niche business after TSR in that era. And we did use it to fund the company that became called Virtual World Entertainment to create the first virtual reality entertainment centers, the first network games that were ever available to the public, and in the process almost drove FASA to bankruptcy multiple times. So.
Right.
But this is groundbreaking stuff, though. I mean, I had no idea, honestly. I read your Wikipedia and everything, and I still hadn't actually understood. Like, this must have, like, when you look back at this and you go, I did that. Do you go, was that me? Or do you believe?
Well, I'm old enough now. Like you can reread the books because you forget them. So same with me. I mean, I was like, I'm old. I forgot. Whatever. Just go do something new.
Yeah,
I mean,
it is. I mean, for somebody who grew up during that time, the FASA logo is just like, it like lives in my head rent free, right? That black swath of material, and then like the star, and then the FASA. It's just like right in my head all the time. And it was a big part of me growing up was TSR, Steve Jackson Games, and FASA. That was like the big three of my youth. Because what FASA did that was very different than what TSR did and what maybe a little more what like Steve Jackson did in things like Ogre and Car Wars and GEV and things like that, was um, take it out of the theater of mind and put it right on the tabletop, and you almost had to do it that way. Like you couldn't play BattleTech without having miniatures and the terrain and measuring
Mm,
things and the hex grids and things like that. That was not necessarily necessary for a lot of people to play D&D. A lot of people in the early
right.
years weren't playing with all the miniatures and things like that just because it
Oh,
just
yeah.
didn't exist. Really, you couldn't really access that kind of stuff. But yeah, it like made my childhood dreams of like giant robots, obviously, because that's what I dreamed of, come true on the tabletop. So yeah, I mean, it is fascinating to hear about where it came from, and
Fascinating.
Yeah.
yeah,
Really?
yeah,
You're going to do
Well,
that?
yeah,
yeah.
and I think you know, I think what differentiated BattleTech at the time. I mean, it's hard to think about it now, but in the context of the era, BattleTech was a fast playing, very accessible title compared to a lot of the very heavy duty,
Oh yeah,
games
Napoleonic war games and things like
of the
that.
era. Yeah.
Oh yeah,
So
totally different.
nowadays it doesn't qualify as that, but in the day it did. But what I think differentiated was that I wanted to have the richness of an RPG, right? But with the kind of accessibility of of a board game, right? Because RPG, I love RPGs, right? They've played such a huge part in my life, and Shadowrun and many others I've created, but they take a lot of preparation, right? Someone, the game master has to invest a lot of work
Right.
to make the sessions great. And so that's a barrier, right? And so the idea was, can we capture some of that magic by taking a board game mechanic, but investing the kind of story richness of an RPG, the character focus and the novels and the tech readouts and the source books and stuff that really just build the texture of the world, which that then when moving those pieces on the board, it just in your head is so much richer and brings that it takes that relatively mechanical play pattern and makes it into a much richer story driven experience.
Yeah, and I think that's really what did separate and still probably does separate a lot of the more American style of gaming from the European style of gaming. Maybe not the Games Workshop style, but because they're quite similar in that regard. Like they build a lot of lore around what is essentially quite a simple game in terms of like Warhammer, right? But build a lot of factions and a lot of history and lore drop and miniatures and all that kind of stuff, and then make you love the world so much that playing the game sometimes is secondary to the world itself.
Oh yeah, no, Warhammer and Warhammer 40K are very much built on the BattleTech model, and they
Mhm.
were not shy about it at all. And as much as I love Steve and Ian back in the day, their business model was like get the distribution rights for the best selling games in the United States, then don't distribute them, and then create their version and publish that. And it worked.
Woohoo! I bet that worked. Yeah. Yikes.
Um, so, but I saw, and they were, like I say, they were very clear in terms of the model that they were working on for Warhammer 40K. But then, unlike me, they stuck with it for 40 years, and just kept building on and building on and building on and building on, right? And it became, more. It transcended from a game to a lifestyle, you know.
Right.
And
That's
and
really accurate, actually. So the person who taught me BattleTech at GameStorm, thank you again. Um, she knew everything. Like she was sitting there telling me the storyline of each of the pilots of the robots or something, and I'm sitting there going, "Do I roll now?" And she's got all of this like huge background, and I'm like, "Okay," and I can understand a little bit more about it now. Like I get how people are so passionate about it, but I used to walk past people doing that and just go, "I don't understand," because I grew up playing European style board games, and I've never understood the wargaming sort of like, what is the appeal of this? Aren't you just shooting at each other and like measuring things? Like, what's the point? And I get so much more of it. So when you're explaining the connection to RPG, I can really understand that a lot more now.
Well, yeah,
So
and I think the European games, are they just have an elegance that I think only recently American designers have started to be able to challenge them on, right? But the abstract elegance of the traditional European strategy game is I've always been very jealous because it's much harder to design something simple than it is to design something complex. I think infinitely harder, right?
truth.
And so I've always been very in awe of people can create those really or just wonderfully simple abstract mechanics that have that kind of depth to them. But yeah, so on the U.S. side, we compensated with story and richness and depth, to build on top of what were less elegant mechanics for the most part.
Yeah, and definitely during a time when that was like the thing everybody did anyways, right? It's like, let's make lots of splat books. Let's do like a faction book for each faction, sub faction and class and subclass, and everybody had like tons and tons of little books about everything in their system, which is actually wonderful. I still have most of them somewhere on a shelf, right? Because they're just great to read and just think about the world that you're playing in. So
Well, and I do think that that's one of the big differences in the FASA games and in many of the games, like the TSR, followed this pattern, and then Games Workshop and many others, was that we wanted to make sure that if you wanted to immerse yourself in this world, that you could do so even when you weren't at the game table,
yeah,
right?
Mm.
That there were opportunities for you to keep getting involved, keep getting rich, keep in the fantasy, and for that to maintain the game in your mind share, right? Whether it was the novel or the source books or the comics or the TV show, right? That once you decided you really wanted to immerse in it, you had lots of opportunities and avenues to do so. And it's fun to explore universes from all those perspectives and in all those mediums, both for the creative team and for the reader slash player.
right. And then like obviously Mech Warrior on the computers and onto the video game systems was a huge thing. And did that bring a lot of people to the tabletop, do you think? I don't even know.
So interesting. It's a good question. So yeah, MechWarrior. So yeah, going back to our timeline. So we've done the BattleTech centers, and then started to open those up into expand them into virtual world centers when the Disney family became our partner in '92. And just about that time, Activision we had sold a license to Infocom, who got bought by Activision. So Activision then had the license, and Infocom done some really good RPGs in the property, Crescent Hawk's Inception and Crescent Hawk's Revenge, which were great. And then Activision wanted to do more of a shooter. They did MechWarrior 1, and then they were really struggling with MechWarrior 2. And our experience in the cockpits was able to help them with that. And then MechWarrior 2 just it tripled the size of Activision. It was I think it was only within the last handful of years that they finally had a title that shipped more units, because it was crazy. It did drive people to the tabletop, but tabletop at that time was still very niche.
Right.
It just, even where you had to know the secret location of the game shop in your town
Right.
to go buy it, right? It was like not quite as bad as a speakeasy during Prohibition, but damn close.
This is so weird to hear about because the equivalent for me was like when I was growing up, the supermarkets in Belgium they had board games like you. This was completely normal. People played board games in the evening, like with their family. You didn't have the TV on, and everyone played. It wasn't like a children's thing. It was adults. Everyone played board games, and so
And
hearing
that's
that was this like
it was so dramatically different between U.S.
how
and
fascinating.
Europe at that time. Incredibly different, yeah. So yeah, I think it did increase it, but for instance, nowhere near as much as recently. Like when we did the BattleTech game at HBS, that had an enormous impact on tabletop because now tabletop was so much more accessible. You
Right.
could just open up a browser and you was going to be at your front door tomorrow, right? Or it's in Target, or it's really quite successful. So that game had a much bigger impact on the tabletop than the Mech Warrior games, which were
Right.
100 times
In the
wider.
90s, right? Yeah. So HBS is Harebrained Schemes, right?
Yes.
And that was so BattleTech has this history where you had it and then you didn't, and then you did a game, right?
Yeah. So it's kind of like BattleTech and Shadowrun have been like the relationship that you come together and you go apart, and then you come together and you go apart from for years. When So we started. So we had the virtual entertainment was doing all the location-based entertainment centers, and we built those out to a worldwide chain of about 35 in the early to mid 90s. Pioneered a lot of what would later become esports with local, regional, national competitions, broadcast on television, big prize pools, all those kind of things back in the day. So that was that chain, and then we took those learnings, applied them to the PC space with the Mech Warrior series, and then Mech Commander series, and that company was called Fast Interactive. The two actually merged. So Virtual World and Fast Interactive merged. And then a couple of years later, Microsoft bought the company, and then actually spun the location-based entertainment, the Virtual World, out from that, and moved all of us in the PC side to Seattle from Chicago. And I became creative director for the whole organization, which at the time was about 300 people, exclusively focused on PC games. And at that point, they bought all of the computer game rights for all the FASA properties, current and future FASA properties. Was because that's what we had when we started FASA Interactive. FASA bought its equity in the new company by investing the computer game rights, all the video game rights, into the company.
Right.
So Microsoft now owned all those rights. All of the tabletop and novel and publishing rights remained with FASA, right? So then at Microsoft, I oversaw the portfolio, the PC portfolio, and then we started Xbox and oversaw the first couple of years of Xbox portfolio of all the games we did there, including Mech Assault and Crimson Skies, which were the two ones that I was most individually involved in, but then working with the whole portfolio, and all sorts of other wonderful experiences that were had there. But during that period, my two elder sons had saved up all their money and went out and bought Warhammer because they really wanted to play miniature game, right? And they were like 8 and 10, I think, at the time. And you can guess how that went. It didn't go well. But it was a really eye-opening experience to me to see these kids who really wanted to play a tabletop miniatures game, and how the industry, myself included, had been really exclusionary, right?
Mm-hmm.
Taking people away by saying, no, you've got to read books that are, bigger than the IKEA catalog, and take 7 hours to do it, and all sorts of record keeping and all sorts of other stuff. So it kind of like made me start to think, how can we make something that's much more accessible, right? And so I do it a lot. I do a lot of times on creative projects. I create a box. A lot of times people say, "Oh, you design out of the box." I'm like, well, no, that's easy to design out of the box. It's designing in the box that's hard.
Right.
And so to me, you'd find the box of all of the different customers' needs and the other kinds of constraints of manufacturing, distribution, and so on. So you kind of scope out what are all the problems that I'm trying to solve with a design, right? So from the player's point of view, it needs to be fast. It needs to be easy to learn. You can't have to use super glue. You don't want to paint the figures because the kids we're trying to reach don't have the eye-hand coordination to paint them like their imaginations, right? That we're trying to make it more of a quick, fun, accessible, expandable game rather than a lifestyle, which painting is much more of a lifestyle kind of thing. So that was all the kind of stuff on the player side. On the and get rid of those big rule books, get rid of the big tables and charts and all that kind of stuff. And then from a retailer side, what are we trying to solve there? Well, figure games take up huge amounts of space on their walls. They have very low inventory turn, so they're really just not great. They're really difficult to become good good selling, ROI investment for them and distribution. What are the challenges there? Manufacturing, so on. So I made put it all together, and then started noodling on it for many months. I realized I love toys, and this was the kind of renaissance of kind of the action figure as a beautiful piece of sculpture with incredible painting details, and I started to look at those. I'm like, if they can make those, then we can make smaller versions of those, right? So I was like, how do I learn how to make those so that I can then figure out how to make my thing? And so I looked for a toy company that was making beautiful figures, but it was very small. And I found these guys in Ohio, and they they were making these gorgeous figures. There was only like 4 of them in the business. So I said, "Hey guys, how about if I paid you X dollars for you to teach me how to make these action figures?" And introduce me to all the contacts and everybody else. And they were like, "Yeah, we're in." So I bought an education. They introduced me, to how, to all the different mechanisms and the processes and the factories and everything. And and then I went and spent a bunch of time in China with all the factories to really learn the manufacturing, and then figure out how do I use that to make the kind of figures that we wanted to make. So okay, now I know how to make figures, but I still needed to, like, how do I get rid of all the rule books, right? And it was actually Thanksgiving Day, because I remember, because my wife always remembers yelling at me. Come to the table, like people want to carve the turkey, come on. And I'm like, no, I'm onto something here. I looked at my drawer, and in the bottom of my drawer, I found what's called what's it called? Basically a rotary slide dial, a rotary, and these were used by graphic artists to, like, determine if you're trying to figure out, I have a piece of art that's 6 inches and I wanted to end up in the book at 3.5 inches. What percentage do I set the camera at to be able to, get the size image I want? So you could, and so it's 2 discs and they rotate, and as you rotate, new information shows up in the dial.
Right? Kind of like one of these discs here.
Exactly like one of those. And so when I saw that in my drawer, it all kind of clicked. Like, that's how I get rid of all the tables and charts. I put those tables onto the bottom of every figure, right? And once I realized, when I do that, now that figure is not a static performance. Like, normally it's a table. It's like, it does this, this, and this, right? But now it has an arc. It can grow. It can change over the course of the play of the game, because all of that is presented right there in the figure. So I got really excited about that, and
I don't blame you. I'm excited hearing about it. Like, this must have felt amazing. Bing.
Yeah, it was pretty cool. My family was like, "That's nice, but the turkey's cold."
But turkey, come on.
We want to eat though, Dad.
Yeah.
Yep.
So I went to I was at Microsoft at this point, but Ross and my father, my partners in FASA. My father joined us about 5 years into FASA, and had the pleasure of working with him for 20 some odd years in various companies, both FASA and Virtual World Entertainment and so on. So I went and presented this idea to them, and Joe Lucas, I think it was Joe, or I can't remember who was president at the time. Could have been Joe, or it could have been Sam Lewis. Anyway, but presented this concept to them, and they were like, well, that seems really cool, but it's really risky. I mean, it's like a lot of money to do all the plastic tooling and the whole thing, and we're just not sure there's really a market for it. I said, okay, well, that's fine, but I'm going to go do it on my own then. And they're like, yeah. And so that's how we started WizKids. WizKids' first product, Mage Knight, which used that system, kind of exploded, and then we followed it up with HeroClix and then the MechWarrior, MechWarrior clicks. I can't remember what we called it, but whatever they were.
I think that was it.
Was it MechWarrior click? I don't remember.
I don't even remember. It's a long time ago for me too.
Anyway, so yeah, that was where WizKids. I can't remember how we got onto this question. So I wanted
I can't either, but it's really interesting.
Right?
No, I can't. I'd have to literally rewind.
There was probably a question in there someplace which I failed to answer.
Oh, it's probably the question of, having BattleTech and then not having BattleTech.
Oh, that's right.
Having BattleTech and then not having BattleTech.
Yeah. So anyway, so then Okay, right. So now we know the computer rights are over with Microsoft, and then WizKids grew quickly, and so WizKids bought FASA. Okay, so now WizKids owned all of the non-electronic rights, the tabletop and publishing and movies and so on.
And you owned WizKids, and then
Yes.
WizKids owned FASA, which you owned
Yeah,
originally. Okay,
It's-
cool.
it's
Just making, but
recursive.
it's the businesses are buying them. I'm just
it's
getting
recursive.
it.
It chases its own tail. Yeah, you can do that. And then Topps Inc. bought WizKids, so then Topps had those rights. But when I would, before we sold the Topps, and we were pursuing kind of much broader games, right? So that meant things like the traditional FASA lines were not really in the business model that WizKids was doing, which were more accessible, broader market, faster playing games. But we still love them, and there were still fans for them. So that's where I originally licensed the rights to publish those to Randall and Lauren and Randall. Got to put them in right order there. Lauren and Randall to publish those games. And so that's when the Catalyst Game Lab kind of formed.
Right.
We gave them those licenses, and then after we sold to Topps maintained those licenses, right? And then after Topps was more recently purchased by Fanatics, I can't remember who bought. Anyway, somebody bought Topps, and they've continued those licenses. So then Microsoft, when I started Harebrained, actually prior to starting Harebrained Schemes, I licensed the whole portfolio of FASA properties back from Microsoft, and then worked with the guys up in Vancouver, Piranha, to do MechWarrior Online.
Right.
So I worked with them and set up that license, and then licensed, and then basically then took those licenses and brought them with me into Harebrained Schemes, where we did Shadowrun and BattleTech games and Harebrained Schemes.
So that was the early 2000s, and then now we are a little bit more recently, right? So that and then there's Shadowrun after that. When did Shadowrun happen?
Shadowrun.
I'm trying to keep up because there are so many.
Shadowrun and my giant bag of D6s happened.
We'll never figure it all out.
It is really convoluted, and this is actually a really fun talk.
I'm so fascinated. This is like, I had no idea that all these things were even connected. I've heard of them all.
It's like a murder board.
They're actually.
With like
and this was
attached to it.
okay. And then there's you in the middle of it all, like.
Mm-hmm. Right, and so currently, Shadowrun is being made by Catalyst Games Lab.
So tabletop.
The tabletop stuff.
Yeah, Catalyst has maintained those licenses since I gave them to them originally. Now 25 years ago. Or so. They continue to publish the tabletop versions of Shadowrun and BattleTech.
Okay, cool. Which brings us to today.
Yes.
Which is the topic of today, which is Adventure Forge.
Yes.
Yes.
Adventure Forge. I was waiting for the music.
The whole reason why we're here today.
A John Williams riff there. Totally did. That would have been awesome.
So, tell us about Adventure Forge, and why should game designers specifically be really, really hyped about it?
Untold riches and glory.
Yeah. Right?
It's
and
what
fame,
we're in the industry for.
Yeah. Is there ever any? I mean, it's either that or world domination. There's only two real reasons to get out of bed, really.
True.
Anyway, not so much. So, Adventure Forge comes from the both desire and frustrations I've had with previous game creation tools. In each of the studios that I founded, I always design the tool sets with which we make our games. And the reason tool sets are so important, from my perspective, is that just like in any kind of entertainment, iteration equals quality, right? the more times you can rewrite the chapter, the better the chapter is.
So can you explain what you mean by tool set? Just to break your flow completely, what do you mean by tool set?
So the tools that the game designers and artists use to create the game
Okay,
is what I'm defining as a tool set.
cool. Thank you.
And the reason that I in all my companies try to create those tool sets as opposed to them working directly with every aspect with the engineers is because it really slows down iteration time, right? If I have to write code for every version I want to make, then the number of versions you're going to get to try is very, very small.
Right.
And the more that you can distance the content creation from the engineers, the faster you can iterate, the more likely you're going to find innovative solutions and get and higher quality content. We've had partial successes of that in all of these companies, but I always just believed that there was a larger potential, a way of getting kind of all of the logic away from software code and into kind of more human English language capabilities, so that designers, if you could construct the logical sentence in your head, you should be able to then put it into the game and not have to worry about syntax or anything else that messes us up when we try to code or script. So that was kind of the frustration part. It's like, how do we enable designers to really innovate and iterate without having to rely on the engineers as part of that core loop. The kind of aspirational component of Endless Adventures is that Mike, as we just reviewed in ad nauseum and way too long, my career has been half in tabletop and half in video games, and the biggest difference between those two sides of the career is that in video games, the players play the story I wrote, or we wrote, our team wrote. In tabletop, the players play the games that they wrote, right? I may have helped us and my team create the setting, help create the mechanics. But that's like we set the table for the dinner, but the meal was made by the participants, right? Made by the people in the kitchen. And video games just have never really had that. And to me, that's one of the weaknesses in our genre, because everybody plays video games, like literally. They're handing out like iPads in delivery wards, right? So it's like, oh, you're bored, here's your iPad. So it's like everybody plays games, but very few people make video games. And that means we have, just by nature, a very small number of perspectives being presented through video games, which I think is sad, from a cultural standpoint, because people like to see themselves reflected in their entertainment. They want to see stories that are relevant to their lives and to their experiences. And that's going to only be severely limited by just the relationship between the number of creators and the number of players. And so my hope with Adventure Forge and the goal for it was to really empower, hopefully, a much wider base of people to create games. And in doing so, I believe, from all my experience in tabletop, that we will see just some incredible innovative things take place. And not both on mechanics and on just rich, deep, and interesting and touching stories, great humor. I mean, we'll see that whole spectrum come out, just like we see in any great tabletop system. So that's where the inspiration for this was.
So one of the things that I found really fascinating when I first heard about this, so I just got my job. I was thinking, okay, cool. What's my first client? And they're like, okay, it's Adventure Forge. This is what you're going to be doing. So, full disclosure, I'm working on Adventure Forge, in the marketing side of things. One of the things that I found really fascinating was the thought that you designed something for designers to design things with. And now I have a better idea of how long you've been doing very much that in one way or another. I'm still really interested in what was it like? What was it like? How did you figure out how to design something for people to design things on? Like, what was your process? You know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah. Well, I think it's like in all bad, I guess not all only bad, sometimes good science fiction movies. You always see the scientist who experiments on themselves and go, well, that really is not smart. But luckily, being a designer, the first thing is build tools which I want to use as a starting point, and then find out if I'm just a wacko or if there's other people who want to use them, if other people can make them, jump to their tune and create the kind of things they want to make with them. And that's not always the case. I mean, sometimes the way my brain works is different than others, and we need to reconceive how to approach the particular tool or aspect of the tool that we're trying to create. Um, but to me, it's a matter of, well, one, I guess, let's start with like the core innovation, and the one that took a couple years to kind of figure out was how do we get rid of the coding, right?
Mm,
Right.
There's been lots of attempts at this. I'm not the first person by any means to come at this problem, and there's been lots and lots of different solutions. A lot of them kind of lean into the graphic side of it, right? So there'll be visual programming languages, which will be very kind of block oriented with lines, drawing between things, and then lots of other kinds of similar solutions. And I found a lot of them worked really well to do relatively simple tasks. But when you tried to express very, very deep and sophisticated logic, something that has like five if questions, like if this is true and this is true and this is true, then do this and this and this and this. Like by the time you put those together in a lot of these kind of visual programming languages, it's just this giant spaghetti hairball, and you can't really follow it anymore. Um, because, not surprisingly, language is powerful, and we can express very complex ideas in a very concise way with language. So once I kind of went through all that and backed my way into language again. All right, so it's got to be language based, but how can it be not syntax based? How can it not require syntax? And so there was just again like set up the box. What am I trying to solve for? Apply lots of different solutions and plot them into the box. What do they do better? What do they do worse compared to the other ideas? And eventually arrived at a system of creating highly contextual drop down menus, so that everything you create in the game, a character, a location, a prop, a tag, which is basically a variable, anything, automatically populates into the correct drop down menu, so that then you kind of just click your way through to create to create a sentence, an English language sentence, and that became very, very powerful, but also very, very accessible. And so once we had that kind of lockdown, and for the first year or two, it was just me and our lead engineer Ian, for the first year plus, of just playing with lots of these ideas. And then once that kind of solidified, then I was like, okay, now let's build the rest of the platform around it. Let's start to take on all these different tool sets. And we were talking about the elegance of European design and the abstractions that are part of it. And I think that's also the solution to creating a game design tools kit that is powerful and not and doesn't channel you into recreating the same game every time.
Right.
Because that was the other thing for me. I mean, there's some really good RPG makers out there, and visual novel makers, and interactive fiction authoring systems, but they're all very narrow in what they do. Right? They just, if you're going to make the tool in this game, your game is going to look pretty much like every other game that comes out of that tool set. And I really wanted this Adventure Forge to kind of span this huge scope of what narrative games can be. Anything from kind of choose your own adventure to graphic branching stories, click and point adventures, hidden object games, visual novels, all the way up into the kind of deep, sophisticated RPGs that we were making at Harebrained Schemes, like with Shadowrun. And I wanted that whole spectrum in one tool, so that you, as the creator, as the writer, the designer, the artist, had freedom to mix all these together in different, unique ways, rather than being channeled into one place. So then it was a matter of, okay, for each of those tools, how do we provide that power but with abstraction enough that you can really bend this to your will to make it into what you want. And it's been really exciting to see. We're just starting closed beta now. Next month will be there'll be a demo. It's in NextFest, Steam NextFest, and that's really the first time we're getting large numbers of people to use it, and we're seeing just incredible things that people are doing with it already. And to me, what's the funnest is every week to open up and go look at it like, what? How'd they do that? It's like none of us thought you could do that with it. And that to me, I think is just the beginning of what the whole history of this will be, is just to keep being blown away by the creativity of the users.
So you basically start with the same kind of problem solving that all of us do when we're thinking of a game design, like there's an experience that I want to create. How do I get there, kind of thing.
Yes.
But then how did you avoid scope creep, or did you just not?
Oh, there's no avoiding scope creep.
It feels like one of those very dangerous projects to take on.
Oh yeah. It absolutely is. And I'm very bad at scope creep in every one of my companies, and this one included. So yeah, no, it's the platform and the tool set has just continued to grow, and I think part of what was the recognition that in success it never stops growing, right? I mean, we're going to keep not I don't know if we'll infinitely add more features, but we will be infinitely revising those features to make them more accessible and more powerful, right? For a while, we still have a lot of features we want to add, but eventually that will peter out. But making them better features, making them more understandable, more accessible, I think will be an eternal quest. So yeah, it's been a huge amount of scope creep, no question about it.
And so there are some of the elements I think that make me think of RPGs in this context are sort of, and I don't really understand how to design an RPG. That's one of the things I've been looking at is how do you actually design this? You're just creating a world and then you step back. And that's exactly it. That's what you're doing. You're basically throwing all these assets in there and going, here you go. How did you stop yourself from continuing to, like, I would be like, okay, and now I'm going to make them do this. And I'm going, no. This is just for you to do that with. How do you stop?
Well, I mean, when making an RPG like the ones we did, like Shadowrun Returns and Dragonfall and Hong Kong and or BattleTech at Harebrained Schemes, or before that at Fast Interactive and so on, there is this great and unavoidable tool called running out of money, which is just really focuses your decision making.
It's one of the parts of the box.
Exactly, it's a big part of that box. And you're running right off the edge of the box or into that head speed. So yeah, I mean, it's the old saying, no work of art is ever finished; it's just abandoned. And I think the art of video game creation, and this will be true for our users, for our gamesmiths who are going to use Adventure Forge, is internally they're going to have to kind of set those boundaries for themselves, right? To what, how far do I take this, right? And to what depth and to what breadth do I take it before putting it out there for people to play? I completely agree.
Troy, yes, absolutely.
Statement there, limitations breed creativity. I've quoted that one a million times, and I completely agree with it. So yeah, I think that'll be important. And part of what we're trying to encourage with Adventure Forge is to treat interactive games much like a fan fiction community does, right? People
love it.
Fan fiction writers don't wait till their novel's finished to put it out there, right?
Yeah,
put it out.
You're putting out there constantly everything, and you're getting feedback constantly, and I think that's the community that we're really trying to try to create there.
Well, that worked really well because that's exactly the message I got when I was like, oh, so I'm basically creating fanfic based on this stuff. Cool. That's neat. I've got all of these assets and these stories ready to go. And I see that we've got a question here from George. So he's saying, can you speak a bit about how Adventure Forge helps you manage state tags as your game grows more complex?
Yeah. So George, the way that tags work is that you can create a tag either as an integer or a string as your base types of tags. And then there's other tags things like reference tags, which are pointers to things, so you can create abstraction to like, oh, I want to write all my logic based upon moving character, but then I can point moving character to Bob or Sally or George at any one time, and the logic will still apply to them. So that's what a reference tag is for. But a more basic integer or string tag, right? You can create them arbitrarily and at any time. You can then place that tag into any entity. So, for instance, you can take the tag love and you can add it to the adventure, which means it's at the adventure level. Or I could add that same tag love to the scene. And it can have different values at the adventure level or at the scene level. I can then take that same tag and put it inside of every character and have every character have a different value for love, right? So then my logic can then be, any logic I want to create to work on love or modify love can then be pointed at any one of those entities at any point. So I hope that answered your question, but
that's really interesting.
Please follow up.
Mm-hmm. So I was the way that I was planning to use the tags is I had this idea that what I wanted to do is have my character walk around a room and pick up pieces and use those pieces to create a puzzle. Mm-hmm. And so once they've collected pieces 1 to 9 or 1 to 8 or whatever, then now they have all the pieces to make the puzzle. And so the tags are the pieces, and they also, like, you're looking for a state of has pieces 1 to 8, and then you can carry on. But what you're talking about is so much more complex than that.
Well, no. I think the way you're thinking about it is a good way to think about it. So, so the way Adventure Forge works is we have different types of scenes, and you have a basic scene, which is a static 2D background on which events can run, or a 2D scene, which is a dynamic 2D environment on which events can run on top of, or an isometric scene on which events can run on top of. Currently, there's only 2 types of events. There's a text event, which is where you do any of your kind of interactive fiction or conversations or any kind of flow, including text input, like you want the player to type something. All of those would be handled in a text event. And then we have a 2D event, which is just like the 2D scene, only now it can run on top of anything. And these 2D event and the 2D scene are both created in our 2D editor. And the 2D editor is this wonderfully, it's probably the tool I'm most proud of because it's the simplest but most powerful tool. You can drop any graphic asset or any text block onto the canvas and then establish different states. And this concept of state is something that goes all throughout Adventure Forge. So characters, props, locations, tiles, these modules in the 2D environment can all have different states. And in each state, you can define what it looks like and sounds like and how it behaves. So with that kind of simple set of abstractions, you can make anything from a really good little graphical interface to really rich mini games like hidden object games or chess games or whatever, right? You can make any of those kind of things work. So for Cat, for the game that you're looking at there, right, as you wandered around the isometric and you found an object, you would then add that tag to the character, right? And then when they got to the place where they were going to do the puzzle, which would be our 2D event, the 2D event would look at all the tags that are on the character and then put those pieces on the board, right, to display those pieces based upon the tags that were inside the character.
And you could also trigger conversations depending on whether or not you've got everything yet.
Yes, yeah. Exactly.
That sort of thing. Yeah, that's really interesting. George has said, in fact, that was exactly what he wanted to know. And he loves the opportunity for code reuse with those pointer tags. So George is also a software developer, codey person. So, yeah.
He's all in. He's like, I love this already.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
We're both using it and coming at it from completely different angles, which is also really interesting because I'm like, I want to tell a story. And George is like, code.
In terms of who you hope accesses this program, what is your hope? What do you want to see out of this?
Well, in terms of the kind of people that I hope use it, we've mentioned fan fiction. I think that is a real large opportunity. I think there's a lot of people. The Venn diagram between people who write fan fiction, read fan fiction, and play games, I think is pretty high overlap. And
the circle.
Yes. So I would hope that we can inspire some really talented writers to try their hand at interactive fiction in addition to linear fiction. I think tabletop game masters, these, those of us who have experience telling stories and building and mechanics for those stories. And I think there's nothing's ever going to be the equal of sitting around the table with your friends. There is no digital experience that's ever going to equal that. But there's a different opportunity here to take those worlds you've built, the stories and characters you've built, and create rich interactive stories and RPGs for a wider group of people to play than those who can sit around your table. And so I'm hopeful that it's an interesting tool for them, as well as artists. Some of the most cool things we've seen in our closed beta actually came from artists more than designers who just they had a little world that they wanted to build, and they created this wonderful little toy box of characters running around and talking to each other. One artist, Oscar, did this beautiful thing that was he called it Oni, and it was all these characters that live in a lily pad, and they're all waking up, and one of them is blocked from getting his breakfast, so he has to go talk to all the other characters about how to get his breakfast. And it's just really cute and really fun. So I think those are the kind of the broader stakes. And then I think there's going to be people like modders who've really already been enjoying modding games, and and can bring in you want to have that power of expression. So I think that they'll be and existing tool users, people who have used things like RPG Maker from Katakawa, or visual novel makers, or things like
Doom
that.
Editor. Way back in the 90s, Doom Editor.
Yeah. Or those who have beat their head against Twine, or other things like that. Hopefully they'll find this a more accessible and powerful tool for them to use.
And of course, you can use them in conjunction with things like that, right? So you can use Twine to put your story together, and then you can implement that story into Adventure Forge as well. So it's not like it's...
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Adventure Forge also has an import tool, so you could write your big story in a text document with a little light markup language we have, and then you bring it in, and it'll automatically build all the conversation trees.
Ooh.
Oh, that is wonderful.
Ooh,
That's
I'm
great,
really
because
excited about that.
That's one of the things I dislike about writing inside of a tool.
Yeah.
It's like I don't write like that. Like I write in like
No.
screeds, just
Yeah.
walls and walls and walls of text. And if I can go back after I'm done writing and then do the organizational markup language, then import it into an engine, that'll be like prime.
Yeah, I was already really excited about the fact that I can upload my own art assets and things. And as you know, that's the start of my design process, is I illustrate the game and then I make the game.
Oh, here's a great question from George.
Yeah.
So in terms of collaboration, I'm glad you asked that. Wow, I'll have to send you the $5 note later for asking these great questions. So currently, so when you create an Adventure Forge account, you can then that's how you create your stuff and share your stuff, and you can invite people to collaborate on your universe or your adventure. So universe is kind of like the higher level entity, and you can put huge amounts of assets at the universe level, mechanics at the universe level, audio at the universe level, characters, props, designs, all those kind of things at the universe level, but no gameplay. It's all assets, right, and mechanics. And then you create an adventure that's within a universe, and it inherits everything that the universe has. And then the designer of the adventure can add all the other additional assets they want, or modify the ones from the universe. But it gives you, as an adventure maker, a way to kind of get right in and start making gameplay without having to have established all these thousands of assets first. And you can create both in the universe and adventures, and you can invite other users to collaborate on the universe or on the adventure, and that gives them the ability to access it. Currently, that's asynchronous, so it means only one of you can be in the adventure or in the universe at a time. But one of the big features that we'll be working on during early access is to make that real-time simultaneous access and collaboration. We've done a prototype of this, and we know it works. And now it's just a bunch of heavy lifting to kind of bulletproof it and build it out through all of the different tools of Adventure Forge. But this would allow you to say, hey, Kat and George, join me tonight. Let's jump online. We're all working on the game, and we're all working on the game in real time. So if I'm editing the character Bernardo, well, I've locked you out of Bernardo. You can't edit Bernardo, but you could be editing a different character. Or you could be editing tiles or locations or working on mechanics or logic. Because the lockouts, rather than being currently the whole lockout is the entire adventure, now the lockouts are extremely atomic. So they're really small. And anytime I save that, so I save my changes to Bernardo, that immediately populates in everybody else's.
Oh, that's really cool.
So anytime you hit play, you're going to play with the latest of everybody. So there's no, in software, like in current software, you have to do merges and builds, and this gets rid of all that. It maintains the game state among all of us in real time. So that's what
That's really clever.
Really exciting collaborations.
Yeah, that's amazing. So it's currently in closed beta, right? When do you foresee this going public and wide? And what do you think the cost is going to be?
Okay, well, those are hard questions.
I know. I'm sorry.
I didn't know it was investigative reporting.
It's the hard questions.
Okay, so yeah, currently we're in closed beta. There are several opportunities to become involved in closed beta, and I'm sure Kat can put one up right there. So yeah, if you go to adventureforge.com and use CatForge as your access, you can get into closed beta now. There'll be a more limited version of the demo that'll be out in Steam Next Fest in June. And then we are going to launch this summer. We're still tying that date down specifically, as well as the price. The way pricing is going to work is the Adventure Forge application on Steam will be free because you want to be able to get to all the games and play all the games inside of it for free. And then there'll be a DLC purchase, price not yet really locked down, to unlock the authoring tools and start making all of your own games. Later in early access, we'll also start enabling the opportunity for creators to charge for their games. So if you want to make a game and charge for an in-app purchase of that game, you can do so, and then there's a revenue share between the company and yourself. So that'll be out later this fall.
That's really exciting. By the way, we're talking about the link tree down here because there are a bunch of different things. So you can go to the website to get onto the closed beta. You can go to Steam to wishlist it, and to get the demo pretty soon, I'm guessing. And also it has the access to the Discord, which is where you can talk to other people and see what people have been making. And there are some really cool things already being showcased on there. So I highly recommend that if this feels like it's your vibe, check out the Discord, because yeah, there's some cool stuff happening.
Right. And I guess one other thing you asked, George, was about various permissions. So there will be that, so that you can invite someone to collaborate, which is one set of permissions. You can enable someone to copy and make a copy of your adventure, and then it becomes their version of your adventure, and they can go off and modify it any way you want. And then obviously the most open version of it is to the ability to play the game, play the adventure. So one of the things I'm excited about, because I'm hopeful that we're able to create really deep level RPGs, but everything we create at Endless Adventures and we publish inside of Adventure Forge will be instantly the most accessibly moddable game there is, because you'll be able to open it up and everything we've done is completely accessible to you in all the same tools. So you can, go off and mod it immediately into show us all the things we should have done to make the game, which is what all of us react to anytime we play a game. It's like, that was awesome, but it could be better.
I think that's really fascinating that you could share a universe. You could have almost like a director's cut, or like somebody's interpretation of different endings of a story, or if people want different characters to do different things, that whole butt thing. You could download that game and change a little bit of code here and there, or tags here and there, and the game would change. And that's really, really interesting.
Yeah, and I'm really excited to see what people do with that. So George asking about versioning. So right now, versioning is handled by the creator via copying. So I can take my current adventure, my current universe, make a copy of it, label it a new version, and that's how I kind of have backups or versioning to your site.
And I can save it locally as well, which I was really excited to find out. So like I if I'm worried about it, I can save it to my local machine as well, right?
Yeah, you can save locally, or the default is to move everything to the cloud, so that it's protected in the unit. But yes, you can save locally as well.
And roll back to previous versions, which I thought was, I think that's what it said in the tutorial.
We don't really have a rollback.
Like reinstall the older one that I saved.
Well,
I've saved the other version.
If you have saved an older version, you can load the older version, but it's not technically a rollback.
It's not. Yes, fair enough.
Well, I'm going to have to wrap up relatively soon.
I think we're there.
Great. Yeah.
We've covered all the things.
Yeah. So just for everybody out there who's watching, the open beta, when does the closed beta end, Kat? Just because this is on video.
Closed beta will continue to, a handful of weeks before launch. I'm not really sure.
Okay. Cool. So this code should be good for a while.
Yes. Yeah.
If you want to go to the link tree and then find the early access and enter the code CatForge, that would be wonderful. You can become involved. Kat, you were going to say something?
I was going to say as well, like if people want to get hold of you in any way, Jordan, is there any way that they can reach you on the socials or anything like that?
Well, I think, I'm actually don't really do much social media.
So is Adventure Forge the best thing for them to look for?
Our Discord is going to be the best way, right? There's, Kevin and Colleen, which are kind of managing and running our Discord. It's a great place to answer, get involved, see what people are building, because there's a great showcase. People share what they're making, ask questions, and the other thing, because again, like a fan fiction community, we want people to be like, oh, I figured out how to do this incredibly cool thing.
And share
that, with each other. So the Discord is also the best way you can post questions there, and you can target them to me, and Kevin or Colleen will track me down and get an answer for you.
There you go.
I heard a rumor you might be doing some like AMA kind of stuff on there. Yeah,
I know we're going to do that. I just got material soon, Kat.
This is a warm up.
We'll yeah, very much.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Troy.
Just to answer your question, how many versions can you save as final? So I'm going to interpret that to mean how many can you publish to the larger community, rather than how many versions you've got access to yourself. And if that interpretation is wrong, please let me know. But you can publish, as long as you change the name, you can publish as many versions of it to the community as you wish. Obviously, I think there is some, as a creator yourself, there's some managing of how to manage your community in that regard, right? And your players to make it so that they can know what to play. I also want to mention
that is slightly a designer joke as well. That we save like the latest version of our, yes. So it's slightly that.
We all fall prey to that.
Yes.
No question about it. I did want to mention one last thing, which is that you don't have to. If you want to share content, you want to share an adventure, you don't have to do it by only putting it into the store. You can share it directly with individuals or groups, and it never shows up in the store.
Oh,
cool.
That's awesome.
And I think that's important because
collaborators can.
Yeah, I want your not only collaborating, but also I want playtesters to play it. They're not collaborating, but I have friends who want to play it. Or I've made this game just littered with in-jokes from my high school D&D crew. I don't want some guy, on the other side of the planet ragging on me because he doesn't get the jokes. It wasn't written for him. It was written for just, my old high school friends.
I guess that is another question. Like, can you lock down a game so people can't change anything then? I'm sure that's a thing you can do, right?
Wait, I'm sorry, I missed the question.
Can you lock a game down so that people can't change stuff?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, absolutely. No. If you just publish it as a game to be played and you don't publish it into the creator store or
I see.
Permissions, then no one can mess with your game.
Perfect. Oh, here Gothic Leela says, just got into the beta and I have to say I'm enjoying the engine very much. The tutorials on your channels help a lot.
Oh, that's wonderful.
They're really good tutorials.
It's very exciting to hear.
Yeah. Excellent. Wow.
Okie doke.
Jordan, thank you so much for coming on the show. It was wonderful going on a trip down memory lane with you. That was like I said, that was my childhood, so that was wonderful. And now we're looking into the future of what Adventure Forge could bring to designers, writers, artists, world builders, GMs, everybody out there who is interested in immersive narratology, storytelling, that kind of stuff. Take a look at Adventure Forge. Again, sign up for the early access using Cat's code, CatForge, and reach out on the Discord to Jordan's team to find out if you have any questions about it, right? There you go.
Yeah.
If you want to talk to me more, you can reach me at Senfeng Lim on Twitter and Blue Sky. Kat, where are you?
Drayering on all the things.
On all the things, alongside us at Maple Syrup on all the things. If you want to help keep the lights on, you can help us out at patreon.com/Maple Syrup. And hey, Jordan, I didn't tell you we were
We
going to
didn't
do
warn
this.
you.
Didn't warn you, but do you have a piece of final advice for everybody?
Piece of vital advice.
Final
Final
advice.
advice.
Final
Oh,
version 3 final
that's-
advice.
Final is easier than vital.
Yes.
Vital advice is like, don't eat things that have stuff crawling in it. But final advice.
Unless it's that cheese from Sicily,
Okay, I guess
which is supposed to have things crawling in it. Sicily? Go on.
the advice that I always give designers when I'm teaching a class on design is start as small as you can. It's very easy for us to think of really like, oh, I'm going to build this enormous thing. Like I would teach classes at USC and video game design, and people are like, come in with like, well, my first project is kind of like Destiny, only a little bit bigger and deeper.
Right.
Okay. Start over, right? So I mean, yeah, I think and this is true in Adventure Forge as well. It's like it's capable of building giant epics, but really start with a one-room thing. Like I always say, like start with a prompt like 3 rooms, 2 lovers, 1 body, and a happy ending. Like build a game like that, right? And build it in a weekend, and then move on to bigger things. But so I think it's design small. Design for someone, right? Not for everyone. Like design who am I designing this game for?
Yes.
And smile when you're making it, because the audience can always tell if you're having fun making it. So.
Yeah. And I think you've given such great advice there. And I was just thinking, as you said, I think this would be a great thing to do like a game jam with.
Oh yeah.
Right?
Oh,
It's like
yes.
a 24-hour game jam with this would be.
Oh, yes.
You could like record a whole bunch of it. Anyways, thank you so much, Jordan. It was lovely talking to you. Congratulations to your family on the wedding that's coming up. And hopefully we'll get to see you around if you're ever at any of the events. But, it's cool.
I look into the cons. So.
Excellent.
All right, guys. Thanks so much.
Thanks for coming. Bye.
Thanks,
See you guys
everyone.
later.